Quite a few students get confused about the difference between transitive and substitution. And that confusion is understandable since all transitive really is substitution. The fact is, all transitive is substitution, but not all substitution is transitive. Let's start with an analogy. A square, for example, is technically a rectangle. So here's a square. What makes a square a square? Well, it has 4 equal sides, but it also has 4 right angles. A rectangle, by definition, has simply 4 right angles. Can a rectangle have 4 equal sides? Sure, and when it does, we call it a square. But all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. You can see, for example, this rectangle that I circled in green has 4 right angles. It qualifies as a rectangle, but it doesn't get to be a square because it doesn't have 4 equal sides. In the same way, transitive is a type of substitution. Transitive is a special substitution, just like a square is a special kind of rectangle. So while we could pretty much eliminate transitive and just call all substitution substitution, or we could maybe not call this a square and just call it a rectangle, we know it's a specific kind of rectangle, it's a special kind of rectangle, it's a square, and so likewise transitive is a special kind of substitution. Transitive is when if A equals B and B equals C, then the conclusion is A equals C. That's the transitive property. In order to have the transitive property, we need 2 equations. And so you'll see here there's 2 equations. We have equal signs on both sides. In addition, both equations have a common element. In fact, each side of an equation has the same thing. In this case, they both have a b. So 2 conditions are met. We both have b's on each side. We have the same thing on each side of an equal sign, and we have 2 equations. Therefore, A equals C. All right, so let's show an example of substitution. With substitution, I might say something like, if x plus y equals 6, and y equals 2, what could the conclusion be? You could say something like, well, then x plus 2 equals 6, or you could say, simplify even further and say x equals 4. And let me show you what just happened. All right, what happened is I start out with 2 equations, right? There's an equal sign there and there. 2 equations, here and here. Now I can't use transitive because I have an x plus y, a 6, a y, and a 2. And none of those expressions are exactly the same like they were in the transitive example above. But when you look at the conclusion below, you'll notice there's no longer any y. The y is gone. What happened? Well, what happened is we found out in the beginning premise, the if part, that y equals 2. And since y equals 2, right there, okay, y equals 2, I can take out this y and replace it with a 2. That's a legal substitution. You're taking out something and putting something in of equal value. And I'm allowed to do that since y equals 2. So the new equation, x plus 2 equals 6, doesn't have a y anymore because the y was removed and a 2 was put in its place. It's a legal replacement or substitution because y and 2 are the same thing. Took out the y, put in the 2. That's not the same as transitive. In transitive, we have to have 2 things that are exactly the same. 2 equations and 2 expressions that are the same on each side, on at least one side of each equation. Here's an example. Suppose I said, if AB equals BD and BD equals CD, then what's your conclusion? Well, in this case, I have an equation on both sides. I have two equations, equation here, equation here. They both have an equal sign. Notice they both have a BD. Because they both have a BD, then I can go ahead and conclude that if AB equals BD, in other words, this one equals BD, and CD equals BD, then it makes sense that AB equals CD. That's the difference between transitive and substitution. Substitution can take place when you have two equations and no element on either side of the equal sign is exactly the same as an element on the other equation. But transitive works because you have two equations with an exactly the same element on one side of the equal sign. That's the difference between transitive and substitution.